The neighborhood looked normal enough, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved at each other when taking out the trash. The houses stood in neat rows, their windows glowing with warm light at night, giving the illusion of safety. But there's always something about quiet streets like these. Beneath the perfect lawns and the white fences, there are secrets that no one talks about. People like to pretend everything is fine until it isn't. Across the street from me lived the Millers. At first glance, they seemed like a regular family, husband, wife, and a teenage daughter who rarely left the house. The father, Tom, always wore the same gray jacket, even when it was too hot outside. He gave polite nods, but never held eye contact. His wife, Carol, looked tired all the time, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. And their daughter, Hannah, stared out of her bedroom window almost every evening, as though she was waiting for something or someone. When I first moved in, they seemed friendly enough. They even brought over a pie, though it looked untouched, like something bought in a rush rather than baked at home. During that first conversation, I noticed how Carol's smile didn't match her eyes. It was thin, practiced, almost forced. Tom barely spoke at all. And Hannah, well, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching me, her face unreadable. That night, as I was unpacking, I thought I heard someone walking around my yard. When I checked, no one was there. But in the dark, I caught a glimpse of Hannah's pale face peeking through her window across the street, staring straight at my house. It didn't take long for the Millers to slip beneath the thin mask of neighborly kindness. Small things began to stand out, things that didn't sit right. Tom started showing up near my property late at night, claiming he was checking for raccoons. But when I asked him why he carried no flashlight, no tools, he only smirked and said, "I like to see who's awake." His words lingered in my mind far longer than they should have. Carol, on the other hand, grew strangely close to me. She would knock on my door in the middle of the day, asking if I had sugar or flour, but her hands always trembled when she held the measuring cup. One afternoon, while sipping tea in my kitchen, she let something slip. "Hannah hasn't been herself since before you moved here." She stopped suddenly, as if realizing she'd said too much, then forced another one of those brittle smiles. That night, I heard raised voices across the street. Tom's deep growl mixed with Carol's muffled pleas, then a sharp slam of a door. Moments later, Hannah's window creaked open. She leaned out, staring into the night, her eyes locking onto mine once again. This time, I didn't look away. The following week, Carol returned, her wrist wrapped in a clumsy bandage. She said she'd slipped on the stairs, but her story didn't add up. I asked if she was all right, and her eyes filled with something that looked like desperation. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He doesn't forgive mistakes. Ever." Before I could ask what she meant, Tom appeared on my porch, his gray jacket stiff, with dirt on the sleeves. His voice was calm, but his eyes held warning. "Carol talks too much when she's nervous. Don't take it seriously." From then on, I began noticing subtle games. Someone moved things in my yard, garden tools I hadn't touched, the lock on my shed left open. Tom waved when I caught him nearby, but I could feel the challenge in it, like he wanted me to accuse him. Carol left folded notes in my mailbox, each one more cryptic than the last. The last note simply read, "Don't trust her either." That message shook me. Who was her? Hannah, or Carol herself? For the first time, I realized I had no idea who in that house was the victim and who was the predator. And maybe that was the point. It all came crashing down on a storm-soaked night. The rain hammered the roofs, and thunder rolled so low it shook the windows. I was jolted awake by a frantic pounding on my door. When I opened it, Carol stood there, drenched, her face streaked with tears. She grabbed my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "You have to help me," she begged. "He's going to kill her." Before I could respond, Tom's shadow appeared at the end of my driveway. He didn't run. He just walked, slow and steady, as though he had all the time in the world. His voice carried over the rain. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. She's always lying." My heart thudded in my chest as Carol pulled me inside, locking the door behind us. She whispered, almost trembling, "You don't understand. It's Hannah. She's the one who hurt me, not him. My stomach dropped. Lightning split the sky, and through the flash I saw Hannah standing across the street, framed in her bedroom window, staring down at us with a stillness that was almost inhuman. For the first time, I noticed the faintest smile curling at her lips. The air in the room grew suffocating. Carol clutched my hand, her eyes wild, desperate for me to believe her. But Tom's voice outside grew louder, demanding I open the door. Both of them swore the other was lying. My head spun with their words, the truth slipping further away. Then, with a sudden crash, the back door burst open. Hannah stepped inside, soaked from the storm, her face calm, her eyes burning with something dark. "Stop fighting," she said softly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "He belongs to me now." The betrayal was not between Tom and Carol. It was Hannah, playing them both, watching, waiting, weaving her quiet control until everything snapped. In that instant, I realized too late. The family's madness had never been about fear. It had always been about power, and I had just been dragged into the center of it. The days after that storm blurred into a haze of confusion. The police were called, of course, but their reports made little sense. Tom claimed Carol had lost her mind, inventing stories to cover her own cruelty. Carol swore Tom had beaten her for years, but when asked for proof, her words faltered. And then there was Hannah, calm, collected, answering every question with a practiced innocence that made her parents look unstable. I watched them unravel. Carol stopped leaving the house, her once forced smile gone completely. Tom grew restless, pacing his yard at night, muttering to himself. And Hannah, she kept staring out that window, but now with an unsettling confidence, as if she had won some private war. I tried to distance myself, but the weight of what I had seen wouldn't let me go. I replayed that night over and over, asking myself who had truly betrayed whom. Was Carol only a victim, or had she tried to drag me into her twisted game? Was Tom a monster, or just another pawn? And Hannah, was she the one orchestrating everything, or had I simply been manipulated into believing? They noticed the shouting, the police visited, the broken glass left out by the curb. Families who once waved now crossed the street. The Miller's house became a stain on the block, something no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone kept watching. Trust in the neighborhood shattered with them. Doors that had once been left unlocked were bolted at night. Curtains stayed drawn. And me, I never felt at home again. The betrayal hadn't just destroyed the Millers. It had poisoned everything around them, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. Months passed, but the echoes of that night never really faded. The Miller's house grew darker with each season, blinds drawn, lawn unkept, as though time itself had abandoned them. Carol seemed to vanish into the walls, her presence reduced to faint shadows behind curtains. Tom aged quickly, his one straight posture bent, his steps slow and uncertain. And Hannah thrived. She walked the street with a calmness that unsettled everyone, as if she carried no burden at all. There was no real justice, no clean ending. The police closed their files, neighbors avoided questions, and the family remained trapped in their silent battlefield. But something had changed in all of us who lived nearby. We realized how fragile trust truly was, how easily the people you thought you understood could twist into strangers. I caught myself wondering, late at night, if betrayal is always loud and violent, or if it sometimes grows quietly, like rot beneath a floorboard, until one day the whole house collapses. The Millers weren't just a family falling apart. They were a mirror, showing us what happens when lies and secrets grow unchecked. And maybe the worst part wasn't Tom's violence, or Carol's fear, or even Hannah's cold manipulation. The worst part was how easily I got pulled in, how quickly I wanted to believe one side over the other, desperate to find a victim and a villain, when in truth, they were all both. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just destroy trust between people. It destroys the very idea that trust can exist at all. And once that seed is planted, it never really goes away. The apartment complex where I lived wasn't anything special. Beige walls, thin floors, the constant hum of someone's TV bleeding through the ceiling. People mostly kept to themselves, exchanging polite nods in the hallways without ever learning each other's names. It was the kind of place you could live in for years without knowing a single neighbor beyond a smile in passing. That was why Mrs. Green stood out. She lived directly below me, a quiet older woman with sharp eyes that always seemed to watch more than they should. Whenever I passed her door, I could hear the faint sound of her radio playing old songs. She spoke softly, almost too kindly, but there was something in her gaze that lingered longer than comfort allowed. At first, I thought she was lonely. She brought me cookies once, though they tasted oddly bitter. She left little notes outside my door, thanking me for things I hadn't done, like watching over her at night, or keeping her safe from the shadows. I brushed it off as harmless confusion, but the notes grew stranger. One evening, as I returned home, I saw her peering through the crack of her door. Her lips moved as though whispering to herself. I caught only a fragment. He doesn't know yet. When her eyes met mine, she smiled, closed the door, and turned the lock. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just watching me. She was waiting for something. At first, I tried to ignore Mrs. Green's strange behavior. People in the building whispered that she'd lived there for decades, long before most of us moved in, and that she had no family left. A lonely old woman, I told myself. Nothing more. But it didn't take long before her presence began to feel heavier, like she was pressing against my life from all sides. She started knocking on my door late at night. Not loud, not frantic, just a slow, steady knock that would drag me out of bed. When I opened the door, she'd smile sweetly, holding out some excuse. I thought I heard footsteps in your apartment. I wanted to be sure you were safe. Or, I think someone tried my door. Did you see anyone? Always questions, always at odd hours, always leaving me with an uneasy pit in my stomach. Then came the lies. A neighbor upstairs mentioned Mrs. Green had told her I came by often, fixing her lights and carrying groceries. I hadn't done any of that. Another neighbor joked that she talked about me like a grandson, but there was a sharp look in his eyes, like he wasn't sure it was funny anymore. The more I tried to avoid her, the bolder she became. I once found my apartment door unlocked when I was certain I had bolted it. Inside, nothing was stolen, but small things were off. A chair pushed slightly out of place, a book left open to a page I hadn't been reading, the faint smell of her lavender perfume lingering in the air. One night, as I walked up the stairwell, I heard her voice drifting upward through the cracks. At first, I thought she was speaking on the phone, but the tone was wrong, calm, hushed, intimate. My blood chilled when I realized she was saying my name, over and over, as if in conversation. Then she whispered, "He trusts me now." The words froze me mid-step. I pressed against the wall, listening. She paused, then added, "Soon, he'll come downstairs on his own." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And for the first time, I wondered if Mrs. Green was truly alone in that apartment, or if she was talking to someone, or something, waiting inside. It happened on a night when the air felt heavier than usual, pressing against the walls of the building like a storm that never came. I was half asleep when I heard the sound, my front door unlocking. Not rattling, not forced. Unlocking. My chest tightened as I slid out of bed, every nerve screaming at me to stay quiet. From the hallway came the slow creak of footsteps. I didn't need to see her face to know it was Mrs. Green. I could smell that sharp lavender scent drifting through the dark. I grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a lamp, and stood frozen in the corner as the footsteps drew closer. Then, in a voice soft and almost tender, she called my name. "You don't have to be afraid. You belong downstairs with me. He's been waiting for you." Her words made my skin crawl. My mind scrambled to understand. Who was she talking about? Lightning flashed through the window, and in that split second of light, I saw her standing in my living room. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking into the shadows, her lips curling into a smile, as though someone else stood there with us. "I told you he'd come," she whispered into the dark. "I never betray my promises." My heart pounded as I realized the truth. This wasn't just an obsession. This was a ritual, a game of devotion to something only she believed she could see. Then her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide and shining. "It's your turn now." At that moment, I wasn't sure what terrified me more, the possibility that she was insane, or the possibility that she wasn't. The police came after my frantic call, but by the time they arrived, Mrs. Green was gone. No sign of forced entry. No proof she had been in my apartment. The officers glanced around, unimpressed, and one of them even hinted that maybe I just imagined it. But the smell of lavender clung to the air, like proof I avoided leaving my apartment. I thought maybe she would calm down. Maybe the whole thing would fade away if I kept my distance. But it didn't. Notes began appearing under my door again, written in shaky handwriting. You disappointed him. He still wants you. Don't fight it. It's worse when they fight. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building felt like her steps on the stairs. Every shadow stretching across my wall seemed to lean toward me. When I passed neighbors in the hall, I noticed their faces had changed too. Eyes darting, whispers cut short as I approached. I realized she had been talking about me to everyone, and whatever story she spun, they half believed it. The apartment complex shifted around me. People stopped greeting me in the hall. Someone scrawled "Watcher" in chalk outside my door. I felt myself being pushed out, isolated, marked as the stranger among them. And Mrs. Green? She stayed below me, unseen but never absent. At night I could hear her radio playing through the floorboards, and beneath the music, her voice, soft and steady, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out, words that sounded less like prayers and more like promises. Eventually, I broke my lease. I packed in silence, shoving boxes into my car while keeping one eye on the windows below. Mrs. Green never came out. She didn't have to. I knew she was listening, maybe even smiling, as I fled. After I left, I tried to put it behind me, but moving didn't erase her from my thoughts. Some nights, I'd wake certain I heard that slow knock at my door. Once, in my new apartment, I swore I smelled lavender in the hallway. Though none of my new neighbors were old women, from friends still in the building, I heard whispers. Mrs. Green was still there. She told people I had been her special one, the one who left too soon. She said I had betrayed him, that I broke the pact. They laughed when they repeated it, but I knew her well enough to understand she wasn't joking. The hardest part was knowing I never uncovered the truth. Was she a lonely woman who lost her grip on reality, latching onto me as the latest character in her fantasy? Or had I really stepped into something darker, something older, something she had been feeding for years in that small, musty apartment? I'll never know. And that's the kind of uncertainty that follows you. Because once you've been chosen, even if you walk away, you can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching. The real horror of betrayal is not just losing trust in others. It's realizing you can't trust your own mind anymore. When I first moved into the cul-de-sac, the man next door seemed harmless enough. His name was Daniel, mid-40s, quiet, the type of neighbor who waved once and then disappeared back into his house. He kept his yard spotless, his trash bins lined neatly on collection day, blinds always perfectly closed. There was nothing unusual about him, at least not at first, but I noticed the silence. While every other house in the neighborhood carried the sounds of life, kids yelling, dogs barking, music leaking from open windows, Daniel's house was always still. No voices, no footsteps, no TV murmuring late at night, just silence. Sometimes, though, I would see him standing at his window long after midnight, staring out into the street without moving. If I happened to glance his way, he didn't look away. He just held my gaze until I closed my curtains. One afternoon, while mowing the lawn, I saw his garage door crack open. Inside, the space was too neat. Tools aligned with obsessive precision, floor spotless, shelves lined with plastic bins labeled in Daniel's sharp handwriting. But what made my chest tighten was the smell, faint metallic, lingering in the air before the door slid shut again. Later that evening, I found an envelope tucked under my welcome mat. No name, no address. Just 3 words written in bold ink. You're not safe. And the handwriting matched Daniel's. At first, I told myself the note was a prank. Maybe a kid in the neighborhood, maybe some sick joke. But when I compared the handwriting to the neat labels I'd seen in Daniel's garage, the similarity was undeniable. I started paying closer attention. Daniel rarely left his house during the day, but at night, I'd hear the faint hum of machinery through the thin walls. Sometimes it was a steady buzzing, Other times a sharp metallic grinding that stopped the moment I stepped outside. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I began noticing small things around my property being moved. My garden hose coiled differently, the lock on my gate left unlatched, muddy footprints near my back steps. Once, I woke to find my car door slightly open, though I was certain I had locked it. Nothing was stolen, but the glove box was left wide open, papers scattered, as if someone had been searching for something. One evening, I bumped into Daniel at the mailbox. He smiled politely, but his eyes lingered too long, studying me. Then, almost casually, he said, "I hope you're sleeping okay. Some nights can be restless around here." The words rattled me, but I forced a laugh and walked away. 2 nights later, I heard something heavy dragging across his garage floor. Curiosity, or maybe fear, pulled me outside. From my driveway, I saw the faint light spilling through the crack under his garage door. I leaned closer and froze. For just a second, I heard it, a muffled cry, weak and desperate, quickly silenced by the grinding hum of machinery starting up again. I stumbled back inside, heart racing, telling myself I must have misheard, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The next morning, another envelope waited under my mat. This one only said, "Stop looking." That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. Around 2 a.m., I finally gave in to the gnawing fear and looked outside. Daniel's garage light was on again, spilling through the narrow windows. I told myself to mind my own business, but my body moved before my brain could stop it. I slipped outside, keeping low, and crept across the driveway. My heart hammered as I pressed my ear against the garage wall. Inside, I could hear it clearly this time, the sound of someone whispering. Not Daniel's voice alone, but another, strained, begging. Then suddenly, silence. The garage door clicked. My chest seized with panic as the heavy panel began to lift. I dove behind the hedge between our houses, barely hidden, as Daniel stepped out. He was dragging a large black bag, the kind used for yard waste, but the way it slumped and shifted as he pulled it. It wasn't yard clippings inside. Lightning flashed in the distance, and for one terrifying second I saw his face illuminated. He wasn't grimacing or struggling. He was smiling, calm, almost proud. I pressed my hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to gasp. He dragged the bag toward the back of his yard, vanishing into the shadows. Then, as if he knew all along, Daniel stopped, slowly, deliberately. He turned his head toward the hedge where I hid. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking, even in the dark. He didn't say a word. He just raised one finger to his lips, signaling me to stay quiet, before disappearing into the trees with the bag. My legs trembled so badly I thought I'd collapse. That was the moment I understood. Daniel knew I had seen everything. And worse, he wanted me to. The following morning, the cul-de-sac looked perfectly normal. Kids rode their bikes, sprinklers hissed across lawns, and Daniel trimmed his hedges like nothing had happened. But I couldn't look at him the same. His smile when he waved felt like a weapon, a reminder of what I had witnessed. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I saw my neighbor dragging a suspicious bag? That I heard whispers through his garage walls? There was no proof, nothing that couldn't be explained away. And Daniel knew that. He counted on it. The second envelope appeared a few days later, tucked neatly under my mat. This time it read, "Silence keeps you safe." My hand shook as I crumpled it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I hid it in a drawer, like some cursed object that proved the nightmare was real. Neighbors began gossiping. Someone's cat had gone missing. A teenage boy from down the street hadn't come home one night, though his parents swore he'd just run off. No one mentioned Daniel, but I saw the suspicion in their eyes, the way their gazes lingered on his house and me. Still, I became complicit by doing nothing. Every night I heard faint noises from his garage, and every night I froze instead of acting. I told myself I was protecting myself, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was letting him win, because silence was exactly what Daniel wanted. Weeks turned into months, and outwardly, life in the neighborhood never changed. Barbecues were still held, children still played on the sidewalks, and Daniel remained the ever-smiling, dependable neighbor. Yet beneath that polished surface, something vile pulsed like a hidden infection. I learned to live with the weight of knowing. At first, I thought the guilt would crush me, but instead, it twisted into something colder, acceptance. Maybe it was survival. Maybe it was cowardice. I convinced myself that as long as I stayed silent, I was safe. But the truth was, silence made me part of his secret. Occasionally, I'd catch Daniel watching me from across the street, not with hostility, but with acknowledgement, like we shared an understanding. He didn't need to threaten me anymore. My inaction spoke louder than words. I had betrayed not only the neighborhood, not only those who went missing, but myself. And in that betrayal lay the cruelest truth. Monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they mow their lawns in broad daylight, wave to your children, and lend you tools when you need them. Sometimes the real horror isn't what they do, but what you let them do. Now, when I walk past his house, I don't look at the garage. I keep my head down, pretending I don't hear the faint clatter of chains or muffled cries, because acknowledging it would mean confronting the part of me that chose fear over justice. And maybe that's the final betrayal, the one we commit against ourselves when we decide it's easier to remain silent than to face the truth.